Alright guys, welcome to Formula 1 News. Red Bull are copying McLaren in their bid to give Max Verstappen a car that's capable of challenging for this year's World Championship. All the data so far indicates McLaren's tyre wear and tyre preservation is a key advantage they currently hold. Red Bull are trying to get back to that point they were a couple of years ago by playing around with a cooling setup they have on the RB21. Supposedly they found something that McLaren have done. They're looking to implement the same idea to their car in order to give them a substantial advantage over the rest of the field. Is there any trickery afoot from the papaya team? Very much into your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I greatly appreciate it. Just wanted to give a quick preview really of the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix because it should be a fascinating one. Qualifying here is always mega because the track is so bonkers and high speed that, I mean, it's not difficult to touch the wall as we have seen plenty of times before. That can mean yellow flags, that can mean red flags, that can mean drama, right? So Saturday is certainly one to watch, but the Sunday as well should be more interesting, certainly than Suzuka. You can overtake around Jeddah. It is a power circuit as well. There is a very small percentage of the laps spent doing anything other than just being flat out, basically. So, you know, Alpine with their engine troubles or their engine disadvantage may well struggle around Jeddah this weekend. But the teams to potentially benefit at the front of the field are, well, potentially even threefold. We mentioned it yesterday briefly, but McLaren's disadvantage this year, if they have one, is their straight line speed. They're a bit draggy compared to maybe where they would like to be, but it's probably a trade-off they've had to make. Around a circuit like Jeddah and Las Vegas, for example, later in the season, Monza, for example, too, they will be in a position where cars with a faster straight line speed probably will have at least a better chance to win. The Mercedes is pretty aero efficient, the Red Bull isn't bad either, and the Ferrari's pretty good too. So if you look at the potential pecking order for this upcoming weekends, the slow speed corners are where the Mercedes tend to lose a fair bit of time and the Red Bull too. There's not much slow speed around Jeddah. So look, McLaren will be favourites for sure, but I don't expect their margin to be as substantial even if they are ahead as some of the other Grand Prix. Of course, 75% of the races here, Red Bull have won. It was Verstappen, Perez, Verstappen after Hamilton won in that incredibly controversial race back in 2021 for Mercedes. And maybe Mercedes are the team to watch. Like I said it last weekend that Mercedes were the team to watch, and it's not exactly rocket science, is it? Because they do have the second fastest car. So it's not like I'm telling you something that you won't already be aware of. But, you know, again, I think Mercedes are a real team to look at because their high-speed performance is very good and they're quick in a straight line. I mean, Russell was gaining 0.2 roughly on Piastri in the first sector in Bahrain. That's straight line speed. But in the middle sector, you know, he was getting eaten alive. So in that first sector in Jeddah, McLaren will gain time, there's almost no doubt. But in the rest of the lap, maybe there's an opportunity for somebody else to pull it back. And they're using soft compounds this year, so like softer, one step softer than last year, so presumably tyre wear and tyre degradation and tyre offsets are going to be more of a thing. It's probably going to be a two-stop race, would be my theory right now, and it may be marginally hotter than last year because it's slightly later in the year. So it all sets up for a rather fascinating Grand Prix where, sure, McLaren will be the favourites, but, you know, there's quite a few features of this track that the W16 will quite like. Red Bull, you never really know. They were good enough in Suzuka for Max to get the win. I think they'll be better than Bahrain, but probably not right there, but I guess we'll see. And then Ferrari are just such an enigma. I think it's basically impossible to say. So that's my preview for the weekend. Speaking of interesting tracks, obviously Jeddah was controversial and still remains as such, but, you know, I certainly enjoy watching them race around there because it's spectacular for good and for bad reasons. This is the Mad Ring, if you guys remember us talking about this a while ago, and it's officially now been commissioned. So congratulations to the organisers. It's going to cost 111 million euros to build, and it goes through a couple of tunnels and over a couple of roundabouts, and I don't want to look at that any longer. But there was a bit of talk about the Grand Prix calendar. Madrid's coming on for Barcelona, of course, which is unfortunate because I'm actually a really big fan of the Catalonia circuit. Imola may disappear from the calendar. This will be a loss to some. I don't think there's that many Formula 1 fans that will mourn Imola's loss terribly. Look, Monza is the home of the Italian Grand Prix, and Imola's been in and out of the sport, and, you know, let's be honest, in the last 20 years, has there been a great Grand Prix around here? Like, it's always been very, very challenging to overtake, and okay, you could say that, well, if there's smaller cars, it'd be better, but even when we did have smaller cars, it's not like Imola produced banger races. So, like, it's a great track for qualifying. There's some legendary corners, obviously so much history for good and for ill at this circuit. But if it goes, and I'm not going to be too sad about it, depending on the replacement, I think, really. If you tell me Imola's going to go, but we're going to make sure Spa's on the calendar every year, sure, I can take that trade-off. If you're going to say Imola's going to go and we're going to get a street track around Bangkok, I'm going to say, probably not. And obviously we do have potentially, this is Qiddiya on the horizon, what they want to be the second Saudi Arabian Grand Prix when this city is built. And I think the target is it's going to take them about 5 years to build it. So we'll see if they can put that all together in that time. Of course, this famous turn one corner that got a lot of talking points at the time because, if you miss your braking point, you might go flying off into the abyss. Now, there are 4 drivers this season who haven't scored points as of yet. Bortoletto is one. I don't think you can really expect him to score points in that Sauber right now. Of course, Hülkenberg took advantage of circumstance and did a phenomenal job to get points at the opening round. Jack Doohan is, he's been okay. He's had obviously a tricky time, but he's at least shown a decent amount of promise so far. We're only 4 races and a sprint in. Lawson is maybe one of the drivers under the most pressure right now because after the tricky Red Bull stint, he's been definitely outshone by Hadjar so far, and he needs to get a one-up in that teammate battle because if he doesn't, then Arvid Lindblad is coming for that seat. And we know what Red Bull like to do with their drivers. It's a fear for Lawson, definitely, after what's happened at Red Bull over the last month or so, to now kind of struggling at RB, especially given the fact that that is a car capable of scoring points. And then, surprisingly enough, Fernando Alonso, Lance Stroll scored 10 points over the opening couple of rounds. That's now fallen off, which is a classic Lance Stroll moment. But will Alonso get the chance? Look, I think he'll score some points eventually. He'll take advantage of some circumstances to make it happen. But the tricky thing for Aston is they have, on average, the 8th fastest car, 9th fastest car? Like, their car isn't good. Every weekend it feels like at least one of Racing Bulls, Haas, Williams for sure. Alpine, of course, are, significantly ahead most of the time. And then, Sauber is doubtful, but still, you know what I'm saying? And also the issue is, for at least Alonso, now he's not going to mind as long as he gets to drive next year's car on some level. But it's been such a bad start to the season for Aston that they will just be switching their focus fully to next year. I think there's no real doubt about that. So that's the tricky thing for Alonso, is that it's not like they're going to have major upgrades in the works to take them back to the points. It's going to be, this is what you've got, Fernando. Do your best with it, basically, while we have Newey work fully on next year's car. There was a bit of a debate about this when Newey joined. Is that, okay, will he work at all on this year's car? Will he be fully focused on next year's car? And yeah, it turns out that it is going to be 100% focused on 2026, which of course makes perfect sense. But it's going to be a painful season for Alonso, that is for sure. Quickly on Lando as well, there's been lots of talk about him, where he sits in the championship. Of course, he's leading it. He is not, according to the bookmakers now, the World Championship favourite. Piastri is officially, as it were, the favourite for the World Championship. And you can understand why. I do think that Lando will come back strongly. I think he's too talented not to. I want to believe that. It's just, again, as I've questioned for certainly the majority of last season, the mentality to me, I'm just not personally that convinced, but he's got the ability to do so. It's just, and I think eventually it will click and he'll put something together. And McLaren have talked about, they've got some ideas to maybe help Lando get a bit more comfortable with the car. And as and when that happens, he'll be right there again. And he's still leading the championship, and I think there'll be certain weekends. The tricky thing is, I mentioned kind of the Saudi Grand Prix, it's not been historically a good race for Lando. I think his best ever finish there was 7th, maybe back in 2021. And for the last 2 years in a row, he's lost out to Oscar. And despite the fact that, obviously, the last 2 years in a row, he was outperforming Oscar basically every weekend, but not at Saudi. And that's a bit of a concern when all of a sudden now Oscar's looking far stronger. And Peter Winter saying there that Norris has been testing out some WRC cars, which is pretty interesting because that's been a bit of a rumour. But these were the comments of Lando. I'm surprised I'm achieving anything that I am achieving at the minute with how I feel in the car. I'm not comfortable. I'm not happy. And look, fair enough to be very open and honest again with the the community, as it were, in Formula One and with the media, but it's not something that you tend to see champions say. Vettel has an interesting perspective. He says, look, Lando's being, I don't think it's a sign of weakness. It might be criticised by some people, but if you look at the broader picture, I see it as progress. He's being more of like a real role model in a sense by being more honest. And you know what? I get it. I get Vettel's perspective, but as far as I'm concerned, the champions that I've seen in Formula One and in other sports tend to be pretty cold, killer mentality. And, well, it's pretty clear even when you look at the championship challenges. You look at Piastri, you look at Max, you look even at the likes of Russell, and maybe you throw Leclerc in the category too. You know, Norris is not of that ilk. And Norris said before the season that he thinks he can do it his own way. And, well, that is being put to the test, let's say, as it stands. Vettel also was talking about the Red Bull and says that it's likely, or at least it's possible, that Red Bull can turn it around. Of course, if they don't, this man is likely to be out of the team. I think this is on Yuki Tsunoda's Instagram or something. Max is... You know, he may just have completely lost his mind with the team. That is a possibility. And just accepting the fact that he's just going to have to run it down this year, and we'll see what let's say, the wind blows in the future. Obviously, there's been lots of talk about where he could potentially go. I saw Will Buxton do a tweet today saying that as far as he's concerned, if he was going to go anywhere, it would be Aston Martin. Definitely intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below on that. There's been a lot of talk about Mercedes, not just from the Mercedes angle of, okay, do you trade out Russell for Max if you could? Do you even kick out Antonelli, although I'm 99.999% sure that's never going to happen for Max Verstappen too. But then also there's the other piece, which is that Max, as I said yesterday, brings a bit of an entourage. There's obviously an expectation that he'll be the number one driver in the team. And, there's some questions there. And also, if you were to join Mercedes, then, let's say from a political perspective, they're definitely a different team than Red Bull, which is maybe why Aston Martin, if you are going to do it, makes more sense. Because if Max went to Aston, he would get his way, right? Like, that's very, very clear that Lawrence Stroll would do whatever it takes to make that happen. Whereas Mercedes are not going to be in that position. Neither would Ferrari be, or probably McLaren either. I mean, there's no way that Max to McLaren seems like a real long shot, but even if it was to happen, it's not like they're just going to bow to his every demands when they've obviously would have a still very talented driver still at that program. But let's talk about upgrades, because if the Red Bull's going to get any better, which it needs to if Max is going to try and win this championship, that's critical for them, especially with other teams making some progress too. Ferrari are confident, apparently. There is an increased confidence among Ferrari engineers after the floor was introduced in Bahrain. It increased performance, but it also seemingly expanded the operating window. Now, there is a big question for me on whether it means they can run the car any lower. That is the key thing, because if Ferrari can run the car lower and not beat up the skid blocks so they get disqualified again, like they did with Hamilton back in China in the main Grand Prix, then they can be right at the front of the field. But if they can't, then they're not. And that's the big question that we may get further answers to in the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, although as we said yesterday, there are further upgrades on the way, and Vasseur says McLaren is still ahead of everyone. They're 2 to 3 tenths faster than us, but that's 2 to 3 tenths that I think they feel they could maybe make up if they could run the car where they wanted to, but right now they cannot. And Ferrari say, we're fighting with Mercedes and a weakened Red Bull. But will Red Bull be weakened for long? Max is not miles off in the championship. He's currently third. That may turn to fourth soon. George is only 6 or so points behind him. But Red Bull have upgrades on the way. There are 2 big deadlines to keep in mind. One, of course, is Spain. Spain is a big one because the technical directive comes into place on the front wings, and I think the rear wings to some degree too, but they're going to clamp down on the flexible wings that certainly it seems McLaren and Mercedes have been using to great advantage. Red Bull have maybe made some progress in that area, but certainly not as much, and the theory goes that it shouldn't hurt Red Bull more than it hurts the other teams. Red Bull expect to gain something from that. That's definitely the main talking point, but also they've got to bring their own upgrade, because that frankly is not going to be enough if they still can't properly look after their tyres on a weekend where tyre degradation is a problem, which of course it wasn't in Suzuka. So this was the discussion from the Auto Racer article today. Thought it was really interesting to see, because plenty of issues on that Red Bull car right now. I mean, and also just in the team in general, the traffic lights that weren't working properly, the actual pit crew seems to have fallen off to some degree. Whether there's anything to do with the fact that Jonathan Wheatley has left, of course, Callum Nicholas, right, a well-known racer mechanic, has also left. So whether that's anything to do with it, maybe not. But brake issues with the car, and this is interesting too. Brembo did not find any critical issues with the brake, so it's all about the setup again. And it was the same argument, you guys remember last year when Verstappen DNF'd in Australia and his brake set fire. Brembo after that said, not our fault, they're the brake manufacturer. and Red Bull effectively had to eat the fact that they'd set it up wrong. Of course, it did spark some discussion about asymmetrical braking and all this at the time, but the rumour has it that they will be bringing an upgrade to these wheel corner baskets, as they describe them. We'll see a picture of McLaren in a second, but this will be part of their Imola package, with the intention to replicate the solution studied by McLaren and useful for cooling its tyres, especially the rear ones. After the Italian stage, the, of course, being Imola, all attention will then be focused to the Spanish Grand Prix, where the much requested, especially by Red Bull, a long-awaited technical directive relating to the front wings will debut. So then we'll see what happens there. But this is a big talking point now that Red Bull have what they believe is a new tyre cooling solution, because at this point, I mean, Formula One has always been about the tyres, but at this point, it's especially about the tyres. And I mean, the drivers, they love talking about the tyres, and for good reason, right? I mean, Pirelli get a lot of criticism for the way that they design the compounds, and on some weekends they're good, some weekends they're not. There was lots of talk from Russell last year that he'll bolt one set of mediums on and he's flying, and he'll bolt the next set of mediums on, and it's a completely different tyre, despite the fact that it's meant to be the same. So, there's drama on that will continue, of course, because tyres are the only thing that the car touches the ground with, and they're rather important if you hadn't realised already. Last year, you guys may remember the big drama around Red Bull thought that McLaren would cook in something anyway. So this was a big rumour, I think it was around the Singapore Grand Prix, that they suspected McLaren were filling water in the tyres to prevent them overheating during the race. And as I said at the time, and I'll say it again, the funny thing about Red Bull is, whenever they accuse somebody of cheating, it's almost always because they've played around with the idea themselves, and then they've not done so because they thought it was illegal. And this is the rumour with Rob Marshall, their former engineer, who's gone over to McLaren recently, and the idea is anyway that there's a few ideas, flexible wings, water in the tyres, that McLaren have been potentially using. I mean, at least Red Bull feel that way, or did feel that way, that McLaren or that Red Bull played around with. And there were rumours that you can put like a drop of water in the tyre and it's going to keep it cool. I mean, look, there didn't seem to be any evidence to support that theory. The more kind of evidence-based theory for how McLaren are able to look after the tyres so much better is the level of complication on the front brakes. This is the only image we really have of it. But if you compare any of these images to what you see on the other teams, this is substantially more advanced in what McLaren are trying to do. The idea, it seems, is that they can control the airflow around the tyre in such a way that they can help it stay warm during a quali lap, but actually stay cool over a race distance, not to degrade too much. I mean, for example, you guys might remember in Bahrain, when it was practice and Hamilton was on a good lap, he was only a 10th down on Piastri through the first two sectors, and then his tyres totally gave way because they overheated. And the McLaren doesn't seem to suffer with that. They can push hard on a quali lap, and by the final sector of the lap, their tyres are still right there in the optimal temperature window and haven't got too hot. So that's the main theory. Exactly whether Red Bull are replicating that type of idea on the rear and the front brakes, but I mean, we've got an image of it, right? So like Red Bull can see these things and try and mess around with some of them, or maybe they're just going to put a little pipette of water in the tyres and that's going to solve the problem. Is it going to solve all of their issues? No, but as Dr. Obb says, that an engineer has told him that the aero gains at this point are so marginal that pretty much this is a game of getting the tyres right. And it was true in Suzuka too. George Russell was looking quick, but Mercedes told him on his outlap, keep the tyres cool because you're going to need the tyres to stay alive by the end of the lap when you get to Spoon Curve. Russell was of the opinion that he should push the tyres hard on the outlap, get them nice and warm for the first sector. That's what Max did, and it worked. Mercedes told Russell to do the opposite, and it affected him. He lost a lot of time in sector one, and that was enough to send him down the order. So tyres have always been critical in F1, maybe no more ever critical than now, if you see what I'm saying. But very much intrigued to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.